Alaikum. Greetings of peace, salutations of peace. First, is the mic working okay? Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam ajma'in. In the name of God, most gracious, most merciful, and peace and blessings be upon the Prophet Muhammad. I am very honored to be here today. This is quite a wonderful gathering and a very novel and new kind of gathering and symposium. Sumaya contacted me earlier in the year when she was kind of considering putting this together, and kept on sending requests to come, and she was quite insistent, mashallah. And so it is quite an honor to actually be here today, and I'm so happy to see all of you and meet this community. I have not been to Nashville before, so it's been an interesting 24 hours or so that I've been here. Yesterday, of course, was Halloween, and so the combination of interesting-looking people in the street, which at first I forgot it was Halloween. So I was thinking, is this what Nashville always looks like? And then, the combination of that and people outside of my hotel room were just singing their hearts out, And I just, mashallah, I was wondering if that was part of the Nashville experience. It must be. All right, inshallah. So it's a pleasure to be here. What I've seen so far has been wonderful. And today I'm going to be sharing with you a little bit about my own work and some of the questions that Sumaya has asked me to address. The talk, as you see here, is about the kind of where Islam, where the faith meets mental health. And we'll do our very best in kind of discussing that. Let's see here. There you go. Thank you. So just to let you know what we're going to be talking about, I'll tell you a little bit about myself and where I come from in terms of coming to this combination of fields, and also discussing mental health from an Islamic perspective and what it means as a Muslim if you are kind of suffering from mental illness, or that you might know people that are. We'll kind of split it into these 4 categories right here and kind of do a little bit of take-home discussion as well. Before I begin formally, what I wanted to do, I thought it might be helpful to just tell you a little bit about my background. Sumaya said many things, but probably from the medical perspective, to know that, just putting it right out there, that I am a trained psychiatrist, so I do come from that background and training. But it wasn't necessarily an easy or straightforward path to decide to actually become a psychiatrist. In fact, prior to this decision, I was in a completely different field doing something completely very different, which is actually what the next slide talks about. And when I was young, I had this opportunity to go abroad and to study the Islamic Sciences formally. My other fate had me go to Damascus. I'm not actually Syrian, but I studied with a group of both women and men teachers, male and female teachers who were in Syria. Some really phenomenal people when it was still possible to go to Syria, and I hope all the troubles that are there are alleviated soon, inshallah. But it was a really awesome place to go and study, and female scholarship specifically is it's one of really the only places a woman could go and really get solid Islamic education to the level of what men would get, and perhaps even beyond. My time there was just phenomenal, and it was back and forth for me because I grew up here in America, and my folks were open to the idea of me studying the Islamic Sciences, but it was really hard for them to send a young girl who does not have family in Syria to go study. And when I first took off, I was about 14, so I was in high school, and my parents had we had these series of treaties between us, but I would continue studying my secular sciences, right, as well as doing the Islamic Sciences. And the only way I was allowed a ticket back to Syria was if I had exceeded in all my academic studies. So I always joke with people that when they ask me, how did you get into medicine and Stanford and all the rest, I say, I got there trying to get to Syria. The studies really drew me. Kind of studying kind of the higher level Islamic studies was really something very important to me, what I wanted to do. And so my trips were all interspersed between high school, college, medical school, and then even into residency, back and forth for about 15 years, until really the conflict started happening in Syria. It was not possible to go there anymore. So in the meantime, I received these certifications, which we call ijaza, in various Islamic Sciences. And my match into where I would do my training, psychiatric training, was actually California, which I wasn't from, but I happened to match there at Stanford. And next door in the Bay Area is the Zaytuna College, which many of you may know of. I was invited by the leaders of the college to teach there. So actually during my residency, I also became a professor at the Zaytuna College and teach Islamic law, specifically the Shaykha School of Law, and women's issues in Islamic law. And up until last year, I was also co-directing their tajweed and hifz programs. So it's been really fruitful and wonderful to be able to kind of do both things. I feel very blessed, alhamdulillah. I only say all of this to let you know very clearly where I come from in my Islamic background and education. It is not a haphazard thing. Inshallah, you see that it's not just sort of another Muslim doctor talking about mental health, if you've ever heard of another Muslim doctor talking about mental health. But what I mean to say is that what I'm about to present, because some of it may be, you may question where it's coming from, I want you to know that it comes from years and years of study. It's not very haphazard, inshallah. All right, so we will move on, inshallah. And what I wanted to begin was really discussing about going into history. So one of my lines in research, one of the things I did while I continue actually to do at Stanford, is a specific line of research on the historical view or perspective of mental illness in the Muslim world. So take us back to what we call the golden era of Islam, to the 7th, 8th, and 9th centuries of Islam. Early on, where all the scholars that we always reference and talk about and make a big fuss about, they were all during that era. And early on, so much happened and so much changed, not just in Muslim societies, but really the entire world. Yet these concepts are rarely talked about. In fact, if you go into a book on history of psychology, history of psychiatry, history of mental illness, either this era of the Muslim era is completely ignored, like completely. Sometimes it's very clear that it's purposeful. Or other times it is just a quick glossing over and certain things stated that are really troublesome, like Muslims really didn't contribute much of anything at all. Okay, next people. Or you get into the history of, I was just writing something on the history of phobias and OCD, two different things. And they'll talk about, we've heard about this in the Greeks and the Romans, and then suddenly you're talking about the Freudian era. Well, what happened in between here? And so there were some great advances that happened, but so much of it is buried in history and just in time. And unless I feel very strongly that unless the Muslims have enough scholarship to really get out and look at their own history and what their own scholars have said of old, we're always just going to be repeating what everybody else is saying about us and not actually figuring it out for ourselves. So I'm very passionate about this, and I think it's really important. And when I first started looking into this, I found a couple of things that I could do. The very first psychiatric wards, as far as we can tell, was actually back in the 8th century in Baghdad and Iraq, and part of what they call the Islamic hospital system. So we hear things like there were these great Muslim physicians in the golden era, but what is it that they did and what was so novel? And, well, part of it is this. There weren't actually psychiatric wards, to our knowledge, before that time. And this became a mainstay feature, meaning hospitals continued to have these psychiatric wards as time went on. Then it went from having a ward within the hospital to actually having standalone psychiatric hospitals, which was also a pretty novel thing. And not only that, but this idea of the psychiatric milieu, which is talked about so commonly, like, for example, my own training, so important, psychiatric milieu, all the time they're talking about it. And it turns out this is something that's actually found back in history. And what does that mean? It means things like making sure that the person who's suffering from mental illness is bathing and is given clean clothes and has activities that are wholesome and meaningful to keep their time occupied. And also talking about the kinds of treatments and therapies that are actually available. So when you think about that, and you think about treatments, People tend to think, okay, medications, okay, therapy, those are both relatively new. No, they're not. And not only are they not new, but things like music therapy was something that was very important for, it was not only new in that era, but became very developed, right? What they call the maqamat, right? Actually using tones to help how people were feeling and elevate their mood. Massage therapy, how cool is that, right? They actually have that. And other types of things, including daily visits by doctors. So this is all pretty neat to know that this actually existed so long ago, right? And why? What was the impetus for this? What caused this to happen? Well, like so many things in Islamic history, all the advances that happened in science and technology and in medicine and so on and so forth, and also in the social sectors as well, in humanities. So much of it was pushed by the hadith and the Quranic ayat of seeking knowledge. You must go and seek knowledge. And that was the impetus for so many of the scholars to go on and find out how to actually figure these things out for themselves. And not only that, but we have here, like it says in the last paragraph, things that are fully paid by the Islamic government, the Islamic State, the correct ones, that is, any of the modern ones. The correct Islamic government and Islamic State, one of its duties was to actually care for the less fortunate, including those who are kind of on what you would call the edges of society, not to leave them there, but to bring them in. And so they would actually pay for all of the treatment of any mentally ill person, not just for a little bit of time, not just for a month or two, but for the duration of their life. So imagine that. And where is this money coming from? So not only, so when a person realizes, that they have mental illness, and the family says, how are we going to treat them? Where's the money? If you live in an Islamic state, it's taken care of. And where is that money coming from? It's coming from zakat, from the alms charity that's given by every other Muslim who's capable of giving it every year. So that is, really important to realize that they had a very sophisticated system built in how to actually care for the mentally ill and how to continue sustaining that treatment. Really phenomenal. Then we talk about another couple things that are really important about the history of mental illness is, I bolded here, moral treatment. So these are all concepts that are kind of relatively new and new age type of treatment, but really it's found in the books of old. And if you're wondering how I came across a lot of this information, some of it is findable, that's whatever's been translated in English, but one of our lines of research at Stanford is actually going back and translating the old texts from between the 7th to 9th century. And we've reviewed now and partially translated over 115 medical manuscripts. And so we go to what would be like the mental health part of that manuscript and actually translate it and figure out what the scholars of old had actually said. And it's been really interesting to find out. And so we learn things like this moral treatment, which at the time, is instead of isolating them and putting them, locking them away, no, there's a different type of treatment, which is actually, it's said to be first pioneered in the Muslim world. And it has to do with this Qur'anic ayah, which a lot of the push came from, which it says, if you see the italicized part, where they're talking about the mentally ill, but feed them and clothe them with this property and speak kindly to them. They are not meant to be locked away. Right? They're meant to be dealt with and treated properly. This is straight out of the Mus'haf, right out of the Qur'an, right? MashaAllah. The Muslim physicians and scholars had hundreds and hundreds of books like the ones I'm telling you about. And they actually talked about everything from diagnosis to classification to treatments. And not to say that these treatments are ones you necessarily would use today, but it's so amazing to know that they had actually done this so long ago. One of the papers I was referring to that I was just writing on OCD, on obsessive compulsive disorder, on obsessions. There was, here I mentioned Al-Balkhi at the bottom of this paragraph. And Al-Balkhi was actually not known, famous necessarily for his medicine. He was actually more famous for being a geographer. And that's a kind of a trademark of many of our Islamic scholars, that they studied many things, and they excelled in many things. You can call them encyclopedic scholars, because not only did they were not just physicians or just engineers or just whatever, they were actually able to tie so many things together. And if you look at their Islamic education, they were memorizers of the Qur'an and people who had mastered various Islamic sciences too. So I mean, this idea of bringing the two things together and a scholar is able to hold multiple fields and master them and excel in them is part of our heritage and tradition, right? So anyhow, Stigma and Bentley, and he has an entire chapter dedicated just on obsessions, an entire chapter. You know, at Stanford, we have one of the forefathers of OCD. He was one of the, he's now retired, but one of the professors there was kind of one of the 5 major people who started the whole, here in America, that started the whole discussion on, and would write the first papers and see the first patients in OCD. And he's one of my mentors. And as I came to kind of find this in my translation and research, I went through and translated the chapter and then wrote the paper. I asked him to actually review it. And remember, this is kind of a very important person in the field of OCD. And as he read this, he just came back and said, "Where did you get this information from?" And I said, "From my Bentley, 9th century." You know, I was just blown away. Because not only does he talk about obsessions in a very kind of modern understanding of it, he actually has very interesting classifications of illness, which we actually took the DSM, which is the Diagnostic Manual for Psychiatric Disorders, the newest one, number 5, and put it against Bentley and actually made a chart to like compare and contrast. And Bentley hit the mark on almost every single one. It was just phenomenal, you know? And that's just one scholar and one is disorder. So I mean, imagine what we're yet to find. So that's why I feel so passionate about actually going back into the history. Not to say that they got it all right, but there were so many people then that were so forward thinking that they may have actually gotten it right. Right? And only now are we able to say, oh yeah, that actually is right. But there's something even more important than being right, and that's realizing as Muslims our own heritage, right, our own background, to know that this is something that our scholars have actually discussed and talked about and not shied away from, right? That this is something that was part of the discussion, was on the table, and they did something about. So the very fact that here we are in Nashville, and everybody heard that there's going to be a symposium on mental health for the Muslim community in Nashville, is like, Nashville? Mashallah. You know, you might think, you know, San Francisco, you might think Manhattan, you might think, I don't know, Houston, you might think some bigger cities. But I'm like, yes, good things start in smaller places. Mashallah. Right? And so it's great to hear this. But I'm thinking to myself, here we are, 2014, having this discussion in Nashville. And our forefathers have already done this hundreds and hundreds of years ago. It is very much part of the discussion. Okay? So anyhow, I wanted to kind of point that out, and historically. Now we're going to go through kind of a series of discussions, and I'll begin with stigma. And some of our lovely ladies were up here earlier, Nergis and Lana, who were here before, and just did a wonderful job kind of talking to us. And really a lot of what they shared is so much more important than what I can share, because they've been through it. And what they're talking about is very real and very heartfelt. And I really, really appreciate their courage to be here and say all this. So you brought up the word stigma before. And stigma is something that people are not very comfortable with, and they kind of put almost like putting a sticky note that says, no, we don't like this. Bye-bye, right? And so one of these different myths that are out there is that mental health only comes to people who are not strong up here, right? They have a low IQ, they're not very mentally with it, and that's why they suffer from some of these illnesses. Well, it turns out that there are some really intelligent people out there that have mental illness. And one of the ones that I've been really impressed with is a lady named Dr. Ellen Sachs, who for years and years and years never actually admitted that she had a disorder called schizophrenia, until she became the dean of the law school at the University of Southern California, USC. Very good school, law school. She herself is a lawyer and had gone up the academic ranks to become at the dean level. Well, after she came to that level, she decided it's now time to kind of reveal this, and she shocked the world, right? She shocked the people around her. And she's written some really great books. One of them is called The Center Cannot Hold, and she talks about how every day in her life, and how there's years and times of her life where she feels like everything's just going to fall through. Yet despite that, schizophrenia is actually could be a very debilitating and what we call a serious mental illness. And despite that, she's on a spectrum in schizophrenia where she was able to really go through, become a lawyer, Not only that, but become a dean and be responsible for many people. And now she's also inspired many people to realize that if you are able to push through, then you can push through, right? She's a great example. Historically, we also have many examples. You have Isaac Newton, who's said to maybe have suffered from bipolar and depression. There's so many that I couldn't even list here, but many of the great artists, many of the great talented people of old and through history and modern, right? I think you were just mentioning Robert Williams, perhaps, and there's actually many, many examples of modern day people as well who have had successful lives and careers in their own path and their own career, yet in the background suffer from a mental illness. So that's fairly common too, that you can actually, it's not like it's not like a death sentence necessarily. It's not like you can't do anything else. So that's really important to realize. Next, in stigma, another one. That psychiatric disorders are not really true medical illnesses. They are like heart disease or diabetes. They are just crazy, right? And so this is a really important thing to talk about as well, because we hear this often enough that it's made the slide, right? That if it's not really a real illness where you go to a real doctor for it. False, right? It turns out that brain disorders, just like you have a brain here that's having some issues, just like your heart here might have some issues, just like your endocrine hormonal system might have some issues, right? And you might have heart disease or diabetes. They're legitimate. They're all legitimate medical illnesses. And the research is now showing a lot of genetic causes, meaning it's something that your parents, just like they gave you the color of your eyes and the color of your hair, and they gave you your skin tone, and they gave you everything else genetically about you, you also may have gotten a genetic predisposition to a specific illness. That's actually something that's real. Or biological. Like what? Well, one of my specialties has been in what we call women's mental illness and women's health. And in women's health, I deal with basically the lifespan of a woman and the different life stages she goes through. So ever since, she becomes a woman, right? So in that pubescent time of her life, where you have the menstrual cycle, and you may have some dysphoric or ups and downs, colloquially we'll call it PMS, right? That happens. Well, that actually could be real. Actually, it is real. And many people don't want to hear that, but anyhow, the women do. And then, she goes through, perhaps she gets pregnant, and she goes through pregnancy, and then she goes through postpartum, which is the time after pregnancy, and then after delivery. And then, then you have perimenopause around the time of menopause and after. These are the normal life cycles of a woman, and they have nothing to do with who you are. All women just about are going to go through them. And so, how do you go through from one stage to another? It's all hormonal. It's something within you that's actually shifting you from one stage to another, to another, to another. And your hormones are not your fault. This is just what happens to a woman. It is a natural, normal cycle. But in some women, the hormones can shift really quickly than others. And it can do funny things depending on how healthy she might be otherwise in the background. And when the hormones shift like that, well, she can get depressed, she can get irritable, she can get angry quickly, she can get very emotional and cry a lot. And these things are not because she's crazy, and not because this is not real and she should just get it together, but many of it has to do with her actual hormonal shift. If we were to actually take the level of hormone, we find there is a real shift that is happening biologically. And this is not in her hands. Nor is it her fault, nor is it your fault, nor is it the parents' fault, nor is it anybody's fault. It's just what's happening inside of the body, right? And so these are really important to understand, because once we realize that some things have a biological basis to them, then we realize they can also be treated with medication, perhaps, just like diabetes can be treated with medication. And this is why it's important to realize that medication can be an important part of the discussion. Okay? All right, next, causes of mental illness. Causes of mental illness. So this one you also brought up there, just so I think it's a good one, right? Mental illness is a result of weak iman, faith, and therefore professional mental health is useless. I cannot tell you how many times I have heard this. In fact, I think one of the reasons I ended up in psychiatry in the first place was because a lot of the work I was doing before was teaching, and the type of counseling that is similar to what an imam might do on the woman's side, right? A lot of teaching that I was doing in the Muslim community. And when you end up working in the community, people come forward with questions, they come forward with issues, concerns. And I was realizing very quickly, despite my Islamic knowledge in the background, there were many things I really couldn't help with. I didn't know a word for it then, I know it now, but the word pathology, that there's something beyond, right? There's something wrong beyond what an untrained person can really help with, despite how much Islamic knowledge they might have. Right? It's not about that. It's about there's something about professional training to actually help somebody. And I was missing that. And that was one of my pushes towards actually going towards the field I was going into, which is speaking psychiatry. Because I felt I really needed to have a more holistic understanding of what was going on inside the body that I couldn't explain to people. Also, when I felt that something wasn't quite right with a person, how do you say that if you don't have the proper words and training? Right? So anyhow, this whole thing about the result of weak iman, I've heard so many times. You're just not a good enough Muslim. You're just not a strong enough Muslim. Go read some more Qur'an. Go pray some more. But what if you have somebody that's reading Qur'an and praying and making dua and in the middle of the night crying their heart out trying to get this iman thing straight, but they still feel really down and blue and they can't get over it? And what if, as much as they're trying, and they're being very honest about trying to do this, and very true to their promise to try to do this, but what if it's still not going away? But we just talked about all the hormones, right? Right? So you can have a mother who's just been through pregnancy and delivery, and this is probably one of my most, one of the examples I feel so strongly about, because I myself am a mother, and maybe many of you in the room here too, and many of you are fathers, and if you're not, then maybe one day, if that's, inshallah, good for you, it'll come. But after, when I became a mother, I think I really understood this. This idea of you have this baby and you're holding this blessing from God, and everyone's saying to you, Mabruk, congratulations, congratulations, so wonderful, and the baby's healthy, and you're healthy, and everyone's so happy that everything went as was hoped for and planned. Then, some women start realizing that they can't get over this crying thing, and they can't get over feeling down, or feeling what we call depressed, and they don't want to get out of bed, and some don't even want to deal with the baby, and so everybody starts telling them, how dare you? How dare you go against the blessing that God has given you? Don't you see this is a blessing from God? And it's not that they don't understand that this is a blessing from God. It's not like she became, lost her mind and thought it was not a blessing from God. It's just that she's having feelings she can't control. But people around her may not understand that, and may guilt trip her, and may get off her case about it and say, you should feel better, you should do better, you should have faith in God, you should believe in this. But again, what's happening in the background? We know that the pregnancy and delivery, the fact that even the way that the possibility of holding that baby in her womb had to do with hormones. To allow that egg to come in and actually implant and become a fetus, and an embryo, right? And become a fetus and become a baby, is all hormones happening in the background. And if she didn't have enough hormones, that baby would not hold, and we call that a miscarriage. The fact that it's there and held has to do with hormones, but now the baby is out. So what do you think happened to the hormones? They shift. And she got there because nobody intervened and took her to a doctor to get some help early on when it was still just a little bit of depression. It just kept going and going and going until it became really bad news. And then she hurt herself and her child. This has happened in the Muslim community. In fact, it's happened under your own roofs here. That's something you need to know. Because this is not a joke. Nor is it something you can just wish would go away or say to somebody, it's okay, look at that. No, this is real, right? And it has some real consequences to both the health of the mother and the health of the child. And that's just one example. And it is so biologically related. And I'll tell you something else. If she has a little bit of depression and it sort of goes away and everyone talks to her and helps her, she may kind of kick that depression and be able to get over it without any extra help. But if she were to have other babies in the future, you should know that untreated depression in first pregnancy means that it might be longer and worse than the second and worse than the third. And I've talked to a woman, mashallah, In our community, it's a good thing to have many children, right? And so who knows, by the time she gets to 5, she was able to kick it once, twice. How long can she keep doing that, right? So these are real things to understand that this is not in people's hands sometimes. Not always, but sometimes. And it really has very little at this point to do with her iman, because she might be trying her hardest, but her hormones are not helping. Okay? So here, I wanted to show you when people say, well, where is it coming from? It's interesting, the lines there. They were supposed to be before connecting to the middle. So basically, what I want to say, what are the causes? So I told you a little bit about biological, a little bit about genetic. Then there's also other causes. Environmental. Sister Lana earlier was talking about, she said the word situational, meaning things happening in the environment. Maybe it's not inside of you biologically or genetically, but maybe it's other things that are bothering you outside. Things that are happening at home, happening with friends, happening at work, happening with your finances, things that are causing you to be stressed out. And also spiritual. We call this, a crisis of faith, when people they're really questioning, is Islam, is this being the right thing for me? Is God really there? Is he really listening? And these are, to some extent, very normal questions. And this is why we have helpers like imams and like parents and help that actually reassure people, hopefully with knowledge, that yes, they are there, right? And here is why, here's how. But to make that question so taboo that a person can't even ask it is not going to help either. Because if they don't come to you and you are able, as the parents would say, to give sound advice, or the imam gives sound advice, guess what? They're going to get help from somewhere else. And that somewhere else may not be where you want them to get help from, right? And you can have a completely different outcome than if you had listened to the question in the first place and tried to help, right? So to know that we call this multifactorial. So mental illness can come from one of these, from two of these, from all four of these. Right? It can come from different places. And the research has not been advanced enough to be able to say, well, your case is coming from this one. We don't really know exactly. We just know it could be many different things that happen. And everybody is unique. Here's another one that I think is really interesting. Mental illness is due to the evil eye, what we call ayn, or jinn, the evil spirits, and should be treated in ruqya, which is a word you heard earlier today, or Qur'an. So let me tell you, as a Muslim, I fully believe in the concept of ayn. It is in the Qur'an, it is there, it is real according to the Islamic theological beliefs. I also believe in jinn, because it is part of our aqidah, it is part of our creed, our faith system. But Allah has created humans, and He has created angels, and He has created the jinn. This is part of our Islamic faith and creed. So yes, I believe that they are there. That's my personal belief, which I'm sharing with you. I believe many of you in the room probably believe in that as well. And the idea of ruqya, if you're not familiar with that word, is actually Quranic inscription, sometimes hadith, but usually it's Qur'an, bits and pieces of Qur'an that a learned person would write and give to the person suffering from whatever it is they're suffering, not just mental illness, but it's used for many things, to read. And sometimes they put it in a little amulet to wear. And there are people throughout Islamic history that have debated this. Is it right? Is it not? Is it right? Is it not? So there's people on both sides of the spectrum, people who feel that this is not proper, and they use the word innovation or bid'ah, and others who feel that it is very much an important thing because it's recitation of Qur'an, and so what's so wrong about that? So there's people on both sides of the spectrum. And so, let's talk about this a little. So could they be from these things? My answer to that is, it's plausible. Could be. However, we cannot blame everything on these things based on everything else that I just shared with you earlier. Could they contribute? Sure. Why not? They could, potentially. And look at what, again, our scholars of old have said, because this is where I go into the historical thing and say, okay, you have these great encyclopedic scholars of the golden age of Islam. And what did they say, since they were such learned scholars, in addition to being, scientists and physicians? So Al-Balkhi, again, says, he says that even if people had obsessions, let's say, that was the thing they were suffering from, even if it is caused by shaitan, the devil, they should still seek therapy. He literally says therapy, to help them conquer the satanic influences. This is 9th century Islam. Therapy. He literally, and actually something that's very famous about Bentley is that he was one of the people, they now are, and hopefully our research will kind of prove this, was one of the, and should be considered one of the forefathers of what we call today cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. Because he talked about, look at the title of his book, The Sustenance of the Body and the Soul. So he talks about mind-body medicine in the 9th century. That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool, because that's very much considered a New Age concept, tying together the two things. Well, we have this in our own history, and he's telling you, I get it. There could be satanic influences, there could be jinn influences, but guess what? You should still seek therapy. Right? And the therapies that he talked about in his book, a lot of them are what we today would call CBT. In fact, there's an author, and I actually have the book with me, M.D, who wrote extensively, he's a psychologist, a Muslim psychologist, who wrote extensively on the different, he broke down Bentley's work and said, and this one is what we today would call the Rogerian theory of, of how you do therapy. And this one is this kind of what we today would call this, and this one is what we today would call this kind of therapy. All this Bentley talked about in the 9th century. Not that he got all the different points of each of those therapies the way we know them today, but the concept, the origin, the seeds were there, which is really cool and really amazing. What else? It's important to know that Muslims can benefit from Ruqya and Qur'an potentially, and that having some Qur'anic recitation that you read is not going to contradict seeing a therapist or taking medications. There shouldn't be a contradiction there. And if you're seeing a therapist who has issue with that, then it's time to go find somebody else, right? Also, if you have an imam who's telling you only do this ruqya thing, or only do Quranic recitation, and don't go see a therapist, it's probably time to go see another imam. In all honesty, right? I'm telling you, coming not just from my own background in both sciences, but also from a historical perspective, this is not our tradition. Our tradition is one that integrates both things. And I think I've proved that, hopefully, through all the slides on having the psychiatric boards and the psychiatric hospitals and the moral treatment of mentally ill patients, and the using the zakat funds to treat them. I mean, this was part of our discussion very much, right? What else? Another myth. If you have mental illness, you can just will it away. Just will it away. Well, it turns out that you cannot actually will mental illness away, and if you ignore it, it can get much worse. Like I was talking about the postpartum depression, that in the next pregnancies, it could be much, much worse, right? Also, here are some ahadith to help us out. From Bukhari, we learned Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu says that the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, there is no disease that Allah has created except that He has created its remedy. This was one of, they say, the scholars say, this was an impetus, a pushing, almost like a catalyst that pushed scholars to actually find treatments, and why medicine became so developed in the Islamic era. Because they would read this and say, wow, every bala, every illness that Allah has sent down, He's also given the knowledge somewhere to somebody to eventually figure out its treatment. And maybe it's not today, maybe it'll be 100 years from now, but we must start trying to figure it out. And that's part of the huge curve, right, into why there's so much development in the Islamic era happened, scientifically and medically based. Because they said, well, let's go figure out the treatments, let's figure this out, right? And so and this is so important to know for anybody who's suffering from any illness, doesn't matter what it is, to know that if you have a bala and Allah has sent it down, our belief dictates that He also has given its cure, its remedy somewhere on this world. Or He's put the knowledge and ability in people to figure out that cure. Which is why our scientists and doctors and so on are so important, because they help us to figure this out. Regardless of faith, I mean, they're very important members of society for this case. Also, we have, O Messenger of Allah, should we seek medical treatment for our illness? This was asked by one of the Sahabi, one of the companions of the Prophet, to the Prophet in his time. And he replied, yes, you should seek medical treatment because Allah the Exalted has let no disease exist without providing its cure, except for one ailment, old age. And you can't reverse old age. We will all die one day. Right? So other than that, everything else that is down here, everything that you see as an illness, as a disorder, as a problem, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given the knowledge or given the treatment and cure for it. What else do we have? Let's talk about treatments. Continue some more. Some people might say psychiatric drugs, I heard that they have a lot of side effects and that they are addictive in nature. Right. Oops. All medications have side effects. Even the Tylenol and aspirin that you buy over the counter. You should pay attention, of course, to the dosage and to the amount you should take it per day. If you go against that, it'll have side effects, I guarantee it. Right? Everything potentially has a side effect. What else? It's important to know how and why you take the medication and the people who prescribe it. So there should be a very active dialogue that you're having with your doctor of, so why are you giving me this one? And what are its side effects? And what are the other medical issues that I'm having? And is this the best and safest thing for me? And if you have a doctor who's not very open or doesn't have the time to talk to you or is unwilling, it's time to change your doctor. Right? It's very important that you have somebody who's able to, if it's medication, that they are actually prescribing it correctly and they're monitoring you correctly. This is their job description after all. What else? We should know that some mental illnesses are due to imbalances or deficiencies in brain chemicals, hormones, and those may need treatment or medication. Okay. We touched on a little. And then also that not all medications are addictive. There are certainly things that are, but you don't have to take those necessarily. Right? There are so many other things that you can potentially try, and in fact, when you do, if you ever do need to see, or somebody you know needs to see a psychiatrist, it may take a good while to finally get the right medications at the right dosage, and to know that these things take time. They take time to kind of figure out. But not everything is addictive. Let's look at it historically. We have Ibn Sina, Avicenna, in his very famous book, The Canon of Medicine, Al-Qanun. And by the way, the Canon of Medicine was used as the primary medical book in the medical schools of Europe up until about the 12th century. I mean, the Canon of Medicine changed how medicine was looked at and studied and treated for generations and generations. So Ibn Sina is a really important figure in the Islamic era in terms of his medical knowledge. And the Qanun, in there, he talks about all the different disorders. And when he comes to the mental health, what we today would call mental health issues, right? He has a very detailed recipes, literally concoctions. A little bit of this herb and a little bit of that, and a little bit of this, a little bit of that will come together in this medication that can work for this. He literally writes out recipes of medications. It's phenomenal. And you say, well, how can you use that today? The answer is Allahu A'lam. I don't know if he's gone back and actually tried to replicate it per se. You kind of really need to find out, although who knows if it's safe enough for a patient to take. But what I would want to say is that if you look at today's medications, don't think that that pill you're taking is just one simple thing. If you look at the breakdown of every medication you take, you will find that they are actually a combination of hormones and a combination of herbs and a combination of this and this substance and that substance and this chemical. It's a whole melange of things. Not very different than what they were doing then, trying to put a little bit of this and a little bit of that, a little bit of this to come up with a medication that treats this illness. So your doctors today that give you specific medications, you should know that our heritage has in it the same concepts from before, right? It's not very new. What else? Counseling is useless. I don't want to talk about my issues, and I don't think that that person is going to understand me. Either because maybe they're Muslim like me and I don't want to tell them my secrets, and I don't want my secrets to spread across the Muslim community. So you should know that every professionally trained person has something called confidentiality that they have to absolutely follow. Meaning, I cannot say who are my patients and who are my clients, even to my husband. In fact, just the other day, we were sitting over dinner, and he said something like, I heard so-and-so is coming to see you. And I just made believe like I didn't hear. He just said. And then he said, did you hear that? And I said, I can't discuss this with you. You know, I discuss everything with you. You're my husband, yes, but I'm not going to discuss this with you. I have limits on what I can say. He said, oh.